Hello, I'm Lucatorix and welcome to my Germania faction guide for Rome Total War. Today we're going to be talking about the Germanian units, or the Germanic units, that's probably the right word, the buildings and also their position on the campaign map. So as you can see, and you could probably guess, that Germania occupies what is now modern day Germany. And they have an army which consists of axemen and specialist infantry with limited selection of cavalry. And there's a lot of heavy sort of units, which we'll be talking about in a second. Germania is, in my opinion, probably the strongest barbarian faction in the game. Now, I don't know, I have a bias towards Scythia purely because they're OP units. Some of their units are very overpowered, but in the traditional sense, Germanians are very tough. Well, they're not very tough, but you know, in terms of barbarian factions, they're the toughest unit you're probably going to face. Toughest faction you're going to face. Either way, yeah, I would just say they're the strongest barbarian faction, probably. We're going to get into the units, so let's have a look and see what they are. Okay, so these are the Germanian units. As you can see, it's a lot of infantry. There are a few cavalry options, but later on in the whole thing, and that's mostly generals. So, first of all, peasants, of course. Now, as peasants go, I think these are actually pretty decent because a 4 defense is pretty high for some peasants. As I say, these are, you know, strong barbarian. It's a strong barbarian tribe, so they're going to have units that are disorganized, but they're probably going to be slightly better fighters than your lower ranking Roman participants, possibly. So peasants, for example, peasants are going to have better defense because they're strong barbarians rather than Roman peasants who probably are just farmers. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, don't use them, they're terrible. Even though they have very slightly better defense, it will not compensate for the fact that barbarian peasants are just weak, in my opinion. Next up, now the interesting thing about Germany is that I think there's only 2 factions in the whole game which have female units in them. Correct me if I'm wrong. Germany is one, or Germania is one, the Screeching Women as an example, and also I think Scythia with the Headhunting Maidens. They are the only 2, I think, in the whole game, as far as I know of anyway. But either way, Screeching Women, they say that the Screeching Women think nothing of participating in a battle, wailing encouragement to their own men as they fight, and screaming defiance at the enemy to unnerve them. So yeah, they are basically to have a morale bonus to the troops, and this is interesting because if I've read a little bit of Germania by Tacitus, and he talks about how the women were actually, you know, part of the combat, and they actually had a bigger part in battles than a lot of other factions of the time. So yeah, very interesting they've added this into the game. Good morale, but yeah, the defensive one, I mean, they're not going to stand up to a fight, but their morale bonus is going to be good for some of these stronger axemen, definitely later on. So Berserkers, one of the most interesting units in the whole game. An attack of 19, which is good, very good. A defense of 7, which is solid but nothing amazing. 2 hit points and 7 to charge. Now, their excellent morale is just, well, excellent by definition. The interesting thing about these Berserkers are, hence the name, they can go berserk. This basically means that if they get hit multiple times, they get hit or they get annoyed or whatever, they go into a berserk mode, they sort of run amok. And the flag above them flashes red, and they just basically go around chopping everyone's head off. You can't control them anymore, they're just going to go on a killing rampage until they all die, basically. But once they go into this killing rampage, sometimes they're pretty much unstoppable. So if you like a disorganised but strong, good fighting army, then Berserkers are great for you. If you like more organisation, then these probably aren't the best, because they will just break the line, they will break the formation, just go around chopping people's heads off, as I said. But yeah, very, very interesting unit, indeed. Next up, Naked Fanatics. I think we've seen these with Spain before. Again, good morale. It's a bonus of sort of the Germania faction, is that a lot of the troops have good morale because they're good fighters, they're willing fighters. And defense of 7 again, it's solid, but you know, the guy's topless. I mean, he's not going to have that good defense. That's probably a weakness of Germanians. If anything, it's their defense, because they literally go into battle shirtless, which is slightly odd if you think about it. But anyway. An attack of, I'm looking at the wrong unit, the attack of 13 is still solid, and they have all the basic perks that most of these units do, which is they're good at fighting in the woods and in the snow, which of course is where Germania is, so that kind of benefits you fighting in the winter. Axemen, relatively generic unit, you see them in other barbarian factions like Scythia, for example. An attack of 11, defense of 9, solid unit. Very similar, honestly. Good morale. They're good at hiding in woods. They have a war cry, which helps their morale attack. Sorry. So a solid unit indeed. Night Raiders. Lightly armed shock troops whose appearance alone is fearful. 14 attack, 10 defense, 6 charge. Good morale again. Yet these are shock troops. You don't see a lot of them actually in the game, but they're sort of meant to get the enemy off guard, and they can just cause a sort of mass rout because they just attack and they can just frighten people. The fact that they can frighten nearby enemy infantry reduces the opposition's morale. So if you're in a critical moment and you need the morale of the opposition to falter, then using Night Raiders is a pretty cool thing to do. It kind of has the same effect as Arcani do for the Roman factions. It's sort of that similar sort of idea. Next up, Spear Warband. Now, the Warband is not an uncommon thing for barbarian factions. What is uncommon for a barbarian faction is to have Warband that can form a phalanx. And this is what makes Spear Warband better than normal Warband, basically, is that they can form a phalanx, which means, of course, they're less manoeuvrable, but it means cavalry is a lot more vulnerable to them, and also they're more solid, they're more organised. They're relatively tough to take down if you just charge straight into the spears. It's not going to end that well for you. So, Spear Warband, quite interesting, and that's something that makes the Germanians an even better faction, is that they can have phalanxes, whereas pretty much I don't think any other barbarian faction has that luxury. Next up, Chosen Axemen. Now these guys are good on the attack anyway. 18 attack, only 6 defense. There's a commonality between Germanians is that they have poor defense, but again, excellent morale, effective against armor, which is pretty awesome. So if you have a heavily armored troop against you, they're going to get through that armor, it's no problem. But as common with barbarian factions, they may just charge without orders. So if you don't like disorganised troops, don't choose Axemen, but you're probably not going to play a Germanian campaign if you don't like disorganised armies anyway. So these guys sort of similar to Berserkers. They won't go Berserk mode, but they might just charge and start chopping people's heads off because that's what they do. Skirmisher Warband, something more sort of a light infantry. I think it's interesting to see Skirmisher Warband in with all these heavy Axemen, but whatever. 9 missile attack is pretty decent, pretty solid actually for some skirmishers, and a 6 attack is pretty decent again in the melee for some skirmishers. 3 defense though, they're not a melee attacker, it's not, they're not meant for melee, so that's not what I use them for. Very interestingly, it says bonus versus elephants. Not really that useful if you're Germania. You're unlikely to be going across to North Africa unless you want to literally take over the whole map, which you could I suppose. But yeah, interesting that the Skirmisher Warband have an advantage versus elephants. Well, I say that actually, of course, Hannibal had elephants in the European continent, so I'm not exactly sure what I'm talking about, maybe. But anyway, and then finally, Chosen Archer Warbands. There's no basic Archer Warband, by the looks of things, it's just the Chosen Archer Warband. Missile attack of 8, but what's interesting is they actually are decent in the melee attack and defense. They have a 10 of both stat, and also have good morale, so actually they're solid. I mean, I'm not going to compare to Axemen, for example, but they're solid, they're competent in the melee, which is interesting. Warhounds, nothing particularly unusual. You've probably seen war dogs and stuff with the Romans before. Attack of 12 is pretty decent, but they're easily chopped down. That's just, poor dogs. Barbarian cavalry, I don't rate. To be honest, I think they break very easily. It doesn't say they have poor morale, but for me, it seems like they do. There's a light cavalry. I just use them to chase off enemies. I wouldn't actually use them in a big proper fight. As I said earlier, the Germanians do not have a wide selection of cavalry, and barbarian cavalry pretty much typifies that fact because they're just not that good. Barbarian noble cavalry now, so we have several different cavalries. These two are the generals. We have 2 higher selections of cavalries that are actually pretty decent. So first of all, barbarian noble cavalry is basically a better version of these guys. Good morale. The attack is 1 better, the defense is significantly better. You can see they're heavily armoured, or not heavily armoured, sorry, they're better armoured than their non-noble counterparts. I don't know what the right phrase is. But yeah, these guys are going to fight better in a long, protracted melee fight, essentially. So yeah, slightly more solid. And then Gothic cavalry, this is quite interesting. Excellent morale, so that's pretty awesome. The attack of 12 and defense of 19 is very solid as well. And yeah, they may charge without orders. That's Germanians for you. And then finally, the Warlord and the Chosen Warlord. The basic Warlord, attack 12, defense 13. Relatively generic unit, but as a barbarian general goes, pretty solid, I would say. And then the Chosen Warlord, after the Marian reforms, has excellent morale and better defense, which is the important thing. So yeah, that's the chosen warlord. So anyway, these are the Germanian units. Not a hugely wide selections, not a very diverse army, but if you just like running into people and slicing their heads off, then pretty fun army, I suppose. Anyway, we'll get into the campaign map after, of course, the quick video.
Before my grandfather's grandfather was born, this was our land. These are good places. Our gods live here, in the trees and rivers. They watch over us. We are happy. We hunt. We love. We have families, homes, a good life. But sometimes we must fight. The Romans disturb the gods. They burn the forests. They take what is ours, wives, children, land. And the Romans talk of how they will help us and protect us. They put us to sleep with golden promises. When we wake, all we had is gone, stolen. They take our sons and turn them into little Romans. Ha! So we fight to keep what is ours. What must stay ours. There can be no peace. No peace with Romans, men of stone and iron and lies. There can be only war.
Okay, so this is the starting position for the Germanians. As you can see, they control 5 settlements. Now, this is all that you can see as the Germanian faction. It's a lot of forest, basically, so you don't have great visibility. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the fog of war. Obviously, I wouldn't normally turn off the fog of war. I'd sort of consider it cheating. But it's just so I can show you what's going on around. So I can't exactly point here and say, oh, well, so-and-so's here, and you can't even see it. So I'll quickly toggle the fog of war purely for demonstration purposes. And now we can see a bit more. Now, immediately what you notice is there's a lot of rebel settlements around Germania. You can't get them all, but you can certainly try. But honestly, the main threat at the beginning is definitely not rebels. Rebels, they're no trouble to you at all. The Dacians aren't really a threat. They're going to have trouble against the Thracians, possibly the Macedonians, and possibly the Scythians. So don't worry about the Dacians, in my opinion. Your main threat, and they're going to attack you pretty much every time, is Britannia. And the reason why Britannia attack you every time is they have nowhere to expand other than south. And they can either go for the Gauls, which happens less, I would say happens less. They generally tend to attack the Germanians more. I don't know why, it's just something they do. They tend to expand in this direction, east. Yeah, the reason is they have nowhere, they can't expand north, they can't expand west, and they can't really expand east. They're not going to bother to do that. It's kind of similar to how if you're the Seleucids, the Parthians always attack you. It's just inevitable. The same if you're Armenia, the Parthians always attack you because they have nowhere to expand other than this direction. And it's the same principle for the Germanians. You will be attacked by the British. So what would I do? Well, there's sort of 2 ways you can do it. You can just literally storm them, so take all your armies, which I would do anyway, and storm this settlement. I've always struggled how to say it, Samoro Breva. You storm this, and then you storm the whole of the United Kingdom, which you could do. I personally wouldn't bother because the UK is not hugely profitable. I can't be bothered, to be honest. I'd rather go and attack the European continent, but you could go and do that. And there isn't a lot of force in the UK either, so that's good. This is the hardest settlement to take of the Britannia. And you can do it relatively okay. If you want to look at my Gaul campaign, first ever episode of my channel, I think it was, the first ever episode, I defeated the army outside, the army of, what's his name, Belenus, there we go, Belenus, outside of here. And you can do it if you just form a big enough army. It's not too difficult. So definitely take this settlement, because if you kick the British off the continent, then they're obviously much less of a threat. Now you'll notice they only have 1 ship. You have no ships, apparently. As far as I can see, the Germanians have no ships, but you want to rush towards getting a navy. Just try and build a port anywhere you can. You can't build a port here, but you can't here either. Well, that's not very good. You're going to have to try and build a port as quickly as you can, because if you don't want to bother attacking the whole of the island of the UK, you have to control the seas so that they can't get over to Germania constantly. So it's up to you. Either you can build up your navy, take out this guy, and make sure they never get back over, but bear in mind, they haven't got a port either, so as soon as this guy goes down, they haven't got any way of getting over. They're stuck on the island, and they can't recruit here because you should have taken a settlement. Or you could just run over and take the whole thing anyway, whatever. But I would go over the navy route. I think that's more fun and realistic, really, if you think about it. But either way, once you've dealt with the British, which is an inevitability that you're going to go to war with them, you have to think about where you're going to go next. Now, by which point the Germanians, the Gauls, are probably at war with the Julii. It happens relatively early on. I would honestly, I mean, you probably could just go for these. You could go for a few of the rebel settlements. Like Bordersholm is a relatively obvious one to go for, especially as it's by the sea. That one's a pretty good one to go for, Vicus Gothi. But I wouldn't bother immediately going for Home Sweet Home or Vicus Venadae. Just leave it to the Scythians. That's my opinion. I just wouldn't bother. And I'd leave these two to the Dacians as well. I would just start going south. And what I would do is, as I said, the Julii are going to go to war with the Gauls really quickly. And what you can do is you can take advantage of that. Both factions are going to be distracted, so you can kind of take advantage. If the Julii, for example, put all their troops over towards Lugdunum area, you can go over and sweep Mediolanum and Patavium off them. And then they're going to have all their troops fighting Gaul over here, and you can just start expanding through northern Italy. If you want to see how really well to advance south quickly against the Julii, a series of YouTubers, I know definitely Legend of Total War did it quite a long time ago. They did a speed run as Germania, and they literally just travelled straight down south to Rome, I think it was. Yeah, it was Rome. So you can do it. Obviously, not everyone's as good as those YouTubers. I certainly am not. But you know, that's what I'd recommend doing. I wouldn't waste time with all these rebel settlements. They're very small. Juvavum, Lovasi, they're not big settlements. It's not worth going for. The good settlements to go for are Mediolanium, Patavium, Segesta, and then particularly Arretium and Aramenium. That's my opinion. I wouldn't bother going to a massive war with Gaul because, again, similar thing. Their settlements aren't profitable. Might as well go for the big ones. So deal with the British and then pour your forces down to hopefully distracted Julii, where you can start taking these settlements. That's sort of my opinion. And then you can just sort of sweep down Italy, and hopefully the Brutii and Scipii will be distracted doing their own thing as well. Anyway, that's kind of my opinion for Germany. It's an interesting faction. I think they are the strongest barbarian faction. Scythia are close because they're just overpowered, but in general, the Germanians probably are slightly stronger. So that's it for me anyway. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with more videos soon. And oh no, wait, I nearly did the outro without looking at the buildings, which would be rather stupid of me. So before we do that, I knew there was something I missed out. We need to have a look at the buildings, if I can do that. Here we go, finally. Same buildings as usual, a lot of them, barracks, stables, ranges, taverns, all that. But 3 temples, unique temples to the Germanians. We have, my pronunciation isn't great, Freya, Donar, and Woden. I don't know. Anyway, they all have unique perks to them. So the Sacred Circle, the highest level, level 3 of Freya, enables us training of Screeching Women, which is quite interesting. 1.5% population growth bonus, that's pretty solid, and a small public order bonus. It's not, it's not the best temple or Sacred Circle ever, but it's pretty decent. Donar, plus 2 experience bonus to troops, which is awesome. Plus you can enable the training of Berserkers, so this one I like more personally. And the same public order bonus. And then this one is a plus 3 experience bonus, so really big. Training of these 2 units as well, and the public order bonus. So probably Woden's actually the best, thinking about it. Yeah, I would definitely say Woden's the best. Yeah, I would go for this one pretty much every time. If you really want to boost population though, Freya is possibly better. Who knows? But yeah, that is my opinion on the buildings. Other than that, they're all generic barbarian buildings. You've probably all seen them before. So anyway, now I can do the outro for real. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.